I don't know what I just witnessed in this Packers-Cowboys game. 40-40 tie. It was the second highest scoring tie in NFL history. I think producer Harry said the highest scoring tie was in 1963. Who was it? Raiders against?
It was the Raiders against the Boston Patriots.
Okay. Raiders, Boston Patriots. I don't know if you guys recall that one. Neither of us were alive, but we were alive for this one, even if by the end of it, I'm not sure I want it to be. Packers, Cowboys tie 40-40. And before we get into like all the details, all the whatever, my number for this game is we're doing the numbers for each game as we always do. 0.312. The Packers EPA per play allowed to the Dallas Cowboys in this game. 0.312. If you don't know that, that's like insanely high. That's like league-leadingly high if you did average that over the course of a whole season. Heading into this game, weeks 1 through 3 against the Detroit Lions, against the Commanders, against the Browns, they were at negative 0.11. They were a top 5 defense in the NFL. People are talking, is this the best defense in the NFL? What happened, JP, tonight?
I think it was a large mix of everything that the Cowboys kind of do well offensively. The first thing is they were able to run the ball effectively. Yes. And I think this was exactly kind of the Jerry Jones like dream for this game. They were able to run the ball efficiently. They were able to get after those defensive tackles, especially between the tackles, a lot of gap scheme. And the biggest thing when they made the Micah Parsons trade was trading away Kenny Clark, who was their biggest run defender. Literally their biggest run defender. Yes. So now you're playing with a lot of lighter bodies. You're trying to steal gaps, which they were doing a really good job of. But it's hard to steal gaps against gap scheme runs. It's really hard to try and shoot gaps against teams running power and counter and duo at you. So I think the Cowboys did that really well. And then Dak Prescott was just on a heater. And when Dak Prescott's on a heater, this is the things that the Cowboys are capable of. I think there was just the throw to Jalen Tolbert in overtime is one of the craziest plays of the year. It might be the craziest play of the year. It was incredible. But he had so many high-level passes, so many just really calm, efficient QB play that you expect from a guy that we all believe is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. So I think it was a large mix of just Dak Prescott being insane, but there are some structural and personnel issues with the Packers defense that I think they'll have to address either within house or make a deadline trade for.
Yeah, the two biggest things we said for this Packers defense coming into the season were the cornerback position, which I think you saw get exposed in this game, whether it was Carrington, Valentine, struggling other guys as well, and I should say, the defensive tackle position, because we said that, they're throwing out a guy who came into the NFL 273 pounds and Kobe Wooden at nose tackle. Their depth, they're like fourth defensive tackle because they had to use it in this one a lot because Devontae Wyatt got hurt. Nazir Stackhouse was a UDFA rookie. He had to play 27 snaps in this game. You're relying on your depth. Warren Brinson as well, obviously didn't play in this one, I believe. But that is your depth at DT. You have a lot of 3 techniques. You don't have a nose tackle. And your nose tackles are rookies. And I think you're finally seeing teams, or you finally saw a team, really hammer that home. Really just say, hey, we're going to attack those guys. And yeah, you can try to, like I said, steal gaps. They do a lot of stunts. They do a lot of slants. They really try to get those guys to create havoc. And sometimes it works, but then when you really are just getting leaned on, when they're starting to get tired, when you don't have the depth that, when you can't play, when you have to play 40, 50 snaps because they're sustaining drives, I think you just saw that position in particular really get exposed for the Packers.
And I think that point that you made about wearing them down later on in games. And it's something, again, Jerry Jones said when he traded Micah Parsons, in some way, this game was like everything Jerry Jones wanted, which is Cowboys competitive, Packers can't stop the run. But the thing with the Packers is because of how light, not only physically they are up front, but how thin they are at defensive tackle, if you're able to just kind of lean on them for large parts of the game. You saw that drive with the Javonte Williams touchdown. They were able to turn those 4-yard plays into 8, and then the 8-yard runs turned into 12, and 12 turns into explosives. And I think that's something that a lot of teams are going to try and emulate going forward against this Packers defense, because when you're always shooting upfield for penetration, it works against zone runs. But when you're always running into brick walls in gap scheme, it's going to start to wear on you. So I wonder what the Packers change up is defensively.
Yeah, because I don't want to say the book is out, but like this is going to be the plan of attack for a lot of offenses going forward. I do, though, want to talk about the end of the game because obviously, I mean, this felt like the Giants game just a couple of weeks ago where it was just from 2 minutes through overtime, it was just nuts. But the Packers got the ball back with, 5 minutes left in this game. They cost them. I mean, they basically, and now it was fourth down when they kicked, but it seemed like the drive, that final drive, they kind of ran out of time with their last 2 plays in this game. Felt like they were rushed to get through it and then ends up in a tie. Why were they going down to the wire like that?
It felt like, for people who are big soccer fans, they know who Jose Mourinho is, who popularized the idea of parking the bus. That is when you get a lead or you're in a game that you really just want to get out of there with a draw or something, you just stop trying to attack downfield. You stop trying forward passes into the attacking third. You stop trying to get shots on goal, and you're just passing the ball around to each other, just trying to avoid any negative plays. And that's what it felt like the Packers were doing, especially in that last drive before overtime and in their only overtime drive. It felt like they weren't actually trying to win. They were just trying to get a tie and get out of there. And it felt really weird. I think the third and one run on the last drive before overtime, you wasted 6 seconds because you could barely get the first down. And then when you get into overtime, the entire stretch of, I think it was run play to Emmanuel Wilson, then you have a blown up screen to Matthew Golden, and then Jordan Love is trying to get them to huddle, but there's like 15 seconds left. So what are you doing? I thought they were going to clock it and they were going to try and get out of there, but they kept trying to actually run a play, and you end up having to throw it at the back of Jack Sanborn with 1 second left. They're really playing with fire with some of this clock management, and it's so fascinating that it always happens to Matt LaFleur, who spends all of his points in charisma and good looks and drawing up cool plays, and none of them in time management.
Because they went into the end of regulation, right, with the timeout in their pocket still, didn't they? Like they still had it felt like a tale of 2 games, because the first half of this game, or the first quarter of this game, was just, it felt like the game was going to be over by halftime. Block field goal or block extra point return. From then on, it was just whoever gets a stop might win this game. It really was a shootout from then on. The Packers, though, I'm not super worried. I still think this is a very talented football team. I think they just ran into a Dak Prescott A to A+ sort of performance. But you do have to worry about the state of this offensive line right now, because they could not. I mean, I think the loss of Zach Tom is massive for this team, because in the past, Rasheed Walker on the left side is himself a guy that, when he goes up against a better pass rusher, you scheme around. You have to protect him. It's hard when you got to protect both sides. When you got to get both sides of that, when Darren Kennard's out there on the right side, and you have to basically hold his hand throughout the game to call plays, it just kind of puts one hand behind your back. So when you have this secondary that's easily susceptible, that pretty much, from that one of the very first plays where they have 2 guys literally open by about 5 yards in the exact same spot, a busted coverage, and one guy wins so much that they're both wide open. From then on, like, they had opportunities. It's just the pass protection was not what we've become accustomed to from this Packers line, basically because of injury.
And I think that part about the offensive line is so important because of how the Packers want to run their offense. Jordan Love and the Packers take a lot of deep drops into the pocket because they're always throwing the ball downfield. You're basically taking Madden drops every time you do play action. And while that's good when you have both your starting tackles in, it's tough for both tackles to maintain that edge, to maintain that bubble of the pocket when the quarterback is always dropping super deep to get the ball downfield. And I think Jordan Love is good at managing the pocket and good at manipulating the pocket. But when you're missing your starting right tackle and then your starting left guard everything sort of kind of collapses upon itself because you can't move up into the pocket because there's pressure coming from the left guard spot. And it's just all the issues sort of compound on each other. Now that you can't get the ball going deep, you have to resort to quick game. You can't get a lot of the run game going because you're missing your two best run blockers. So there's just a lot that compounds with the offensive line not being healthy. And for them, I think it's important to get those guys back to maintain that level of explosiveness they want to be.
Yeah, a well-timed bye for the Packers coming up this week, and then the Bengals coming up the week after that. If they can't get right in that game, well, it may be time to worry a little bit about this Packers team.